All right, welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Now, our sources seem to particularly focus on this thing called the change path model.
Right.
They really highlight how useful and practical it is as a guiding framework. So we'll definitely be spending some extra time unpacking that one.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point to make that just like different sports require different training programs, right?
Right.
You wouldn't train for a marathon the same way you'd train for, a weightlifting competition.
Right. Right.
Being a leader in times of change, it requires, having a diverse set of tools and strategies.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Being able to pick the right approach for the right situation. So to kick things off, let's start with probably one of the most well-known models out there. Lewin's three-stage theory of change. Unfreeze, change, refreeze. You've probably heard of this one.
Yeah, very classic.
So simple on the surface, but really profound when you start to think about it. What Lewin was getting at here is that before any real change can happen, you have to shake things up. You got to disrupt that existing equilibrium. That way things are currently done.
You got to unfreeze it.
Exactly. Unfreeze the mindsets, the behaviors, the structures, everything.
And a big part of this unfreezing, as our source material points out, is creating this feeling that change is actually needed.
Right, like a sense of urgency.
Exactly. And sometimes this can come from outside pressure. Like, imagine new competitors popping up with some new technology.
Oh, yeah, disrupts everything.
Suddenly you're not the top dog anymore, right?
You got to adapt or die.
Exactly. And in other cases, leaders might actually try to highlight problems that already exist, kind of create a bit of a crisis.
Right, like shine a light on things that might be uncomfortable, but that need addressing. Okay, so thinking back to that hotel example from earlier, let's say the manager gets this one complaint letter. Is that going to be enough to unfreeze their thinking?
Probably not on its own, right? I mean, one letter could be an anomaly.
Right, but what if it's not just one letter? What if it's like a whole stack of complaints? Or those occupancy rates are tanking compared to their competitors.
Oh, yeah, then it starts to become a pattern. You can't ignore it anymore.
And they can definitely contribute to unfreezing,
Right.
that feeling that the status quo is no longer an option.
Mm-hmm.
But it's crucial to remember, as Lewin's model points out, this unfreezing needs to happen at all levels of the organization.
Yeah, it's not enough for just the manager to get it. The front desk staff, the housekeepers, everyone needs to feel that need for change.
Right. It's got to be a collective understanding, not just a top-down directive. So
Okay.
once you've got everyone unfrozen, shaken out of their routines, then you move into the second stage, which is, well, change. This is where things start to get really dynamic.
Yeah, and messy too sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. You're introducing new processes, new behaviors, maybe even restructuring things.
Mm-hmm.
So in our hotel example, this could be anything from implementing a whole new software system for managing rooms to revamping how they train their staff, maybe even reorganizing who's responsible for what.
Yeah, and it's a time of learning and experimenting, figuring out what works, what doesn't, and making adjustments along the way.
There's bound to be some uncertainty during this phase, right? People are going to be figuring things out.
Mm-hmm. It can be a bit uncomfortable, for sure.
And then after all that change, you've got the third stage, refreeze. And this is about solidifying those new ways of doing things, making them the new norm. Lewin talked about this idea of homeostasis, which basically means that organizations, like any system, tend to resist change and want to stay stable. So refreezing is about establishing a new stable state, but one that incorporates all those changes you made.
Yeah, it's like finding that new balance. Our sources use this great analogy of a spider web. If you tug on one thread, it affects the entire web, right?
Right.
So refreezing is like adjusting all those threads, all those interconnected elements to create a new, stronger web. It's about reinforcing those new practices through things like policies, performance evaluations, even just the culture of the organization. It's got to become part of their DNA, their default way of operating.
Mm-hmm. It's got to stick. Okay, so Lewin's model is super useful, but our sources also point out that it's not without its limitations. It's great for getting that basic understanding, but like you said, change is messy. It's not always linear. And this model sometimes oversimplifies things. Plus, it doesn't really address that initial step of creating a compelling vision, something that motivates people to embrace the change in the first place.
Right. And the whole idea of refreeze, it kind of implies the static endpoint, like you reach this point and everything's done. But in today's world, things are constantly changing, especially in business. So it's not quite that simple. Like, think about how fast technology changes. Something that's cutting edge today could be obsolete in a year.
Exactly. And that's a real challenge for leaders, right? Yeah. It's about building in that adaptability, that ability to continuously evolve even after you've gone through a major change. And our source even suggests using the term regelling instead of refreeze, like, finding that state of stability that's still flexible enough to adapt. Okay, so let's move on to our second model, Kotter's 8-stage process. Now, this one gets a lot more granular, a lot more step-by-step compared to Lewin's big picture approach.
Yeah, Cotter really breaks it down into a very structured progression through these 8 distinct phases. He really believed that nailing each stage is absolutely crucial for building momentum and making sure those changes stick.
Right, like if you skip a step or don't do a good job in one stage, it's going to come back to bite you later.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's walk through these stages. First up, you got to establish a sense of urgency. You need to make it clear why change is needed, why doing nothing is not an option. Highlight those potential negative consequences and get everyone on board with the need to act.
Yep. Then you got to build your team, stage 2.
Yeah.
Create a guiding coalition. You need to bring together influential people from all across the organization who are dedicated to this change effort and have the power to actually make things happen.
Right, it's about building that core group of champions. And then stage 3, you develop a vision and a strategy. Yeah. It's not enough to just say, we need to change. You got to paint a clear picture of what that desired future looks like and lay out a plan for how to get there.
Give people something to strive for, to get excited about. And then stage 4 is all about communication. Communicate that change vision. And this isn't just like a one-time announcement. This needs to be consistent, coming through multiple channels, reaching everyone in the organization, and making sure everyone understands the benefits of this change. You got to really drive that message home.
You got to be relentless. Stage 5, empower employees for broad-based action. This is all about removing those roadblocks, anything that's preventing people from embracing and contributing to the change. And that could be things like outdated processes or even just individuals who are resisting.
Yep.
Clear the path. Then, number 6, you need to generate short-term wins. Get some early victories, demonstrate that this change is actually working, show people the value of what they're doing. It helps build momentum and keep everyone motivated.
It's all about those small victories that prove you're on the right track. Stage 7, consolidate gains and produce more change. Don't stop there. You got to use those early wins to tackle bigger challenges. Keep pushing forward. Our source makes a point that a lot of change initiatives fail at this point because people declare victory too soon.
It's tempting to rest on your laurels, but you got to keep the momentum going.
And finally, stage 8, anchor new approaches in the culture. This is about making sure those changes you've worked so hard for become ingrained in the organization, in their values, their norms, the way they do things day to day. It's going to become second nature.
Yeah, so it's not just a temporary shift, it's a lasting transformation.
Okay, so Kotter's model, it's very comprehensive, lays out a really detailed roadmap for change. But, it's very linear. And like we were saying before, real-world change, it's messy. So it begs the question, how flexible is this model? Can you go back to earlier stages if needed? Can you work on multiple stages at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, Kotter presents it sequentially, but I'm sure in practice there's got to be some overlap, some iteration.
I would think so.
The key takeaway, though, is that those foundational elements of each stage, they got to be addressed. So, yeah, you might be focusing on generating those short-term wins, but if you sense that urgency is fading, you might need to circle back and remind people why this change is so important.
Right. Keep those fires lit.
Okay, so for our third model, we're going to shift gears a bit. We've been looking at these top-down, process-driven models, but now we're going to talk about Gentiles giving voice to values, or GVV. This is a really interesting approach because it puts the focus on the ethical dimension of change and how individuals can make a difference.
Yeah, I really like this one. It's all about empowering people to act on their values, even within a complex organization.
Right. It's like, how do you speak up? How do you do what you think is right when you're just one person in a big system?
Exactly. And the really cool thing about GVV is that it doesn't dwell on defining what's ethical. It assumes you have that sense of right and wrong. Instead, it's about developing the skills and the confidence to actually act on your values when things get tough.
It's about having the courage to speak up when you see something that isn't right.
And they actually teach this in a structured way. The GVV curriculum has 3 core components. The first one is clarification and articulation of your values. So it starts with self-reflection. What are the principles that are most important to you?
Right, like getting clear on your own ethical compass.
Exactly. And our source mentions this list of common values that a guy named Kidder came up with. Honesty, respect, responsibility, fairness, compassion. These are good starting points for thinking about your own values.
Right. It's about moving from like a gut feeling about what's right and wrong to a clear, articulated set of principles. Okay, so once you've got that foundation, the second part of GVV is post-decision-making analysis and implementation plan. And this is where it gets really interesting because instead of just saying, this is the ethical thing to do, it's about, okay, and how do I actually make that happen within my organization? Like, how do I influence others? How do I navigate the politics? How do I make a real difference?
Exactly. And it involves this thing called stakeholder analysis, which goes beyond just weighing the pros and cons of a decision. It's about understanding the people involved, their values, their motivations, and how they might react. And a key part of this is anticipating those common justifications people use to rationalize unethical behavior. Like, oh, everyone else is doing it, or it's not a big deal, or I'm just following orders.
Right, the classic excuses.
And GVV gives you a framework for developing counterarguments, for finding ways to persuade those people to do the right thing. It's like arming yourself with the tools and the strategies to effectively advocate for your values. And our source gives this great example of a guy named Ajeth, who's facing pressure to pay bribes in a developing country. GVV provides a way for him to think through that situation, to figure out how he can resist that pressure and stay true to his principles. So it's not just about knowing what's right, it's about figuring out how to actually do it. And then the third part of the GVV curriculum is all about practice, the practice of speaking your values and getting feedback. So it's things like role-playing those difficult conversations, practicing how you would articulate your position, getting feedback from trusted colleagues or mentors, and building that confidence and resilience to actually stand up for what you believe in.
So it's really practical. It's not just theory. Okay, but now, how does this focus on individual values lead to organizational change?
Right.
The idea is that when more and more people are equipped and empowered to speak up, it can create this ripple effect that starts to shift the entire culture of the organization. Right. It's about those individual acts of courage adding up to a collective movement. And our source has some really compelling examples of how this can work. Like this woman, Helen Dreenan, she challenges a potential cover-up of sexual harassment and ends up sparking significant policy changes within her company. And then there's this other case, the naivete or boldness case, where an employee challenges some flawed assumptions their CEO is making and ends up influencing a major strategic decision. So those are powerful examples.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, are there certain conditions where GVV is more likely to be successful in driving change? Are there types of organizations where it might be harder for those individual voices to make a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it seems like GVV would work better in places where there's already some level of ethical commitment, even if they're not perfect. In really toxic or unethical environments, speaking up can be risky. But even in those situations, GVV can still help people find ways to promote their values, even if it's in more subtle ways. Okay, let's move on to our fourth model, Duck's 5-stage change curve. This one takes a slightly different perspective. Instead of focusing on the steps or the process of change, it looks at the emotional journey that people go through during times of transition.
Right. It's about understanding those human reactions to change.
And Duck makes the point that change isn't just this logical, rational process. There are real emotions involved. People get anxious, they get excited, they get frustrated, and leaders need to understand and address those feelings.
So the first stage of Duck's curve is stagnation. And this is when things are kind of coasting along. People aren't really seeing the need for change. There's a sense of complacency. Duck says that the leader's job here is to shake things up, to create that awareness of why change is necessary.
Right, sound familiar. It's kind of like unfreezing.
Exactly. And then comes preparation. This is usually triggered by the announcement of the change. And now people are starting to feel all sorts of things. Anxiety about what's going to happen, hope that things will get better, maybe some cynicism based on past experiences. So leaders need to be really communicative and transparent during this stage to manage those different reactions and get everyone prepared for what's coming.
Yep. Then you've got implementation, where those changes are actually put into practice. This involves designing new structures, maybe changing people's roles, and most importantly, shifting mindsets and habits. This can be a tough stage. There's likely to be some resistance. Strong leadership is needed to guide people through it.
And then stage 4 is determination. And this is where that initial excitement might start to fade as the reality of this long-term change sets in. People might get tired. They might start to question if it's worth it. So Duck says that it's really important for leaders to keep the energy up, to keep reminding people of the vision, to celebrate those early wins, and to keep everyone motivated.